in?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, that's a small crowd. I thought we'd have a lot more. Mr. Bibb, if you'd like, you can put on your unmute, and if you want us to see you, you can put your video on. Otherwise, you could just listen to the presentation, and that's fine. If you have any questions, you can send them through chat as well. Can everybody hear me okay? Let me just put my audio a little bit up. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to go over a presentation. Since you both are new to my town hall meetings, I'll just explain what I do through these. Is basically a budget 101 kind of meeting to explain how the budget works, and then give you a brief overview of what the council is going to be considering at their budget workshop, and then later on budget meetings. Oh, there's Miss McNaughton. Hello, Laura. Hope you're good.
I'm here.
How are you?
How was your vacation?
Oh my God, it was a vacation. Well, it was a great vacation till the last day, and all hell broke loose because they boarded us on a plane. We went to Hawaii, by the way, for a week with 2 toddlers, which was a mission in itself. So we were 7 people traveling, and then we boarded the plane to come back, and they had us on the tarmac for 2 hours, where the electricity went off and they couldn't get it fixed. So by the time they disembarked us, got us all in line, and then sent us back to hotels for the night, we didn't get our heads on a pillow till 3:30 in the morning, their time. So we were exhausted is an understatement. The next morning, my son woke up, fever, vomiting, the whole fun part. So it's been a marathon. We finally made it back, and then I ran to urgent care with them just to make sure that, God forbid, they didn't catch something while they were away, but they didn't, thankfully. But it was a marathon. So yeah, I slept till I think 12:30 today. It's like 18 hours straight, just passed out. I was so exhausted. So I'm doing this from home today, so hopefully we won't have any technical difficulties, but I think we're good. And we're a small enough group that you guys can jump in if you have any questions. None of the 3 of you, I don't recognize any of you going to my budget town halls before, but typically they're very informal, and I allow, for you guys to ask questions. It's really like a budget 101 kind of session, just to give you an understanding of what council is going to be reviewing at their budget workshops, and then during the first reading and second reading. So right now, what we're going to go over is the budget as it is currently posted online. The council, when they have their workshop, the council is going to get an updated budget, because some numbers actually have changed between the last time that we put the budget online, and today. We just haven't provided that to council yet. And the reason for those updates is because sometimes the state provides us figures, and the timing of them sending those figures just doesn't work with the publishing of the first budget before the July 1st requirement as per the charter. So you'll see what we go over today is not going to be identical to what's going to be provided to council during the workshop, but everything is looking actually better from a number standpoint. So when you're going to, the stuff that's going to council is actually going to have better numbers as far as revenues coming in and such. So it's only going to look better when it goes to council. Okay, so with that said, let me just share my screen. I'm going to first go over the presentation that I gave to council originally. If you didn't listen on I guess it was the July 13th meeting, I'll go over that with you. And then I'll open the budget document and then just show you the different parts of the document so you understand. You can go back and review everything and understand how it works and why it is set up the way it's set up. Okay. Okay, so share screen. Let me go to budget presentation, town hall. Here it is. Okay. Okay, can everybody see that? I'm just gonna move everybody.
Yeah,
over.
I can see it.
Okay, perfect. All right. So I'm using this as a PowerPoint because it was easier. It was doing all kinds of weird stuff. Okay, so this first chart will show you what the millage rates have been since incorporation. So for those of you who do not know, a millage rate is the rate that's charged for every $1,000 of taxable value that you have on the property. So minus obviously any exemption, like homestead exemptions and stuff like that. And so any taxable value. So the village traditionally, if you could see here, the 26-year average has been 2.25 mils, which is roughly $2.25, right? That's the average for $1,000 of taxable value over the 26-year history. When we first incorporated, our millage rate was set at 2.277. And you'll see here how it's fluctuated over the years. But typically it's the highest the millage rate has ever been in our history is 2.4 mils. And that was between the years of 2002 and 2006. And we've never gone to that. We're just below that at 2.35 recommended for the last 2 years. Okay. Any questions about millage rates and how that works? So the mill rate is what provides us the basis for the ad valorem taxes, which are just one of the multiple revenues that the village receives for the budget. So we have other revenue sources, which I'll go over a little bit more as we go through this presentation. Okay. The ranking, how we rank. Okay, so this chart, and I know it's really small, but what I want to show you is we are one of many taxing agencies throughout the state. So if you look at your taxes, when you get your tax bill, you'll notice there's a bunch of different taxing agencies that are listed there. You'll have, for example, in unincorporated Dade County, you'll have a millage rate. You'll have, the county's millage rate, which is what they call the UMSA tax, right? So if you're in an unincorporated area, you're charged the UMSA tax, which stands for Unincorporated Municipal Service Area tax. But all cities, including areas that are unincorporated, also get charged a county-wide millage, which is this here. We get if the city doesn't have its own fire rescue department and it goes with the county's rescue department, that also is a millage rate that you see here. And the library district has its also a millage rate. Then in addition to that, you have regional millage rates like South Florida Water Management, the Everglades Project, Okeechobee Basin, and this one that's called FINE is the Florida Inland Navigation District. And then you have the school board also that charges mill rates. Okay, so when you add all the millage rates, that's what you're seeing total millage here. So the total millage rates includes the city's mill rate. Okay, and down here is when you'll see Pinecrest is where we fall in comparison to everybody else. These millage rates are the existing millage rates for the last 2 years. We have yet to get the proposed mill rates for next year from all the cities. Once the county receives those, they'll publish those and we update that for a future chart. So you could see the more updated version, but this at least shows you currently where we stand in relation to other municipalities for all total millage rates. Okay. The one thing I do want to mention, just because it's very unique, and because I happen to work in some of these other cities in my past life, for example, Key Biscayne, Bal Harbor, Aventura, Doral, specifically Sunny Isles, their millage rates are low. The lowest is Key Biscayne. Key Biscayne, even though their city millage is low, they don't get a fire rescue millage from the county. They have their own fire department. And so their total millage rate, when you look at the total millage rate on this chart here, is lower. It's at 16.51. And that's mainly a function of the fact that they have their own fire rescue department. The other ones, what you'll notice, like Bal Harbor, Aventura, Doral, Sunny Isles, those cities in particular have their distribution from a zoning perspective is very different than the village. They have a lot of high-rise condominium type, which tend to provide really good high property tax revenue, but because you have a lot more densification. And so because they have that type of zoning, that also helps them being keeping their mill rate low. The ones that are more comparable to us is obviously Palmetto Bay and Miami Lakes, and we're right neck and neck within 10 cents of each other. Okay, next slide. Okay, so again, this is kind of like what it's showing now and what's published now. I wanted to make sure what I presented to you would match what's online right now from a budget perspective, but these numbers are changing. They are going to be better. So off the top of my head, I'll kind of try to give you the two scenarios, but I wanted to just keep it to the same so that it would make sense with the budget document. Okay, so the proposed, okay, so let me just go back. The village's budget is divided into different funds. So think of it as you having multiple bank statements, and each bank statement is for a different purpose. So the general fund is what we call the general operating budget. That particular bank statement or bank account has everything that's the day-to-day operations of the village. And then we have, for example, the Stormwater Fund. The Stormwater Fund only has things that have to do with stormwater drainage utility, okay? And then you have Transportation Fund. The Transportation Fund can only has expenditures in it that the law requires us to keep to certain things only that are transportation related, and like that. And I'll go over all the funds, but I just wanted to give you an idea that we don't have that our consolidated budget, when you look at our consolidated budget that looks at all the funds, is much bigger than just the general fund. But what we do for the day-to-day is what the council calls the general fund budget, operating budget. Then there's a capital project fund, which has all the different large construction projects built into it. So I'll go over. So when I speak about the general fund budget, again, that's just the day-to-day operations of the village. So the proposed general fund budget, including transfers, what they mean by transfers is any money that goes out of the general fund budget into other funds to pay for different things, is totaling $27,268,725. Again, for the purposes of this presentation, I don't know that I'm going to get into so much the numbers, down to the penny. I'm just going to round it up like 27 million, but you're looking at the numbers here so you understand that we're speaking just in general terms. Okay, I apologize. I left my phone turned on. Okay. The proposed budget is showing an increase in revenues over last year's budget of 7.65%. I can tell you, just because I went over the revised budget, that increase is going to be more than 9% with the revised numbers. But for now, what's published is a 6.75% increase in revenues. The big jump in revenues, normally we only anticipate about 4% revenue increases from one year to another when we forecast. But because we're coming out of COVID and a lot of things were depressed and now they're not going to be, you're going to see a big jump in the percentage of increase. But that's a function of the fact that we had depressed revenues this year because of the pandemic. We're anticipating an increase in expenditures over last year's budget of 6.3%. The new numbers are going to be closer, like I think it was 7.5% for the new numbers. But for now, again, what we're working off of is what's published, is a 6.3% increase in expenditures. And again, the expenditure hike, normally our expenditures from one year to another are forecasted between 3 and 4% increases. The big jump is because we're, again, ramping up things that we've had on, closed down and not functioning the way we normally do because of the pandemic. And we're anticipating just coming back to normalcy next fiscal year. The most significant departmental increase occurred in the police department. It was just over $600,000. And the majority of that goes to cover, when you see here, the breakdown of that increase is just over 300,000 for what they call personal expenses. And I just want to clarify, we know that it's it's personnel with an NNEL, but the reason it's called personal expenditures is because that's the way the state requires us to categorize it for some reason. And instead of calling it personnel services, they call them personal expenditures. So we keep it the same, but we know the difference. But in any case, when you see personal expenditures, that means personnel. Anything that has to do with salaries or benefits falls into that. So the increase you're seeing here of $312,000 just in the police department is made up of salary increases and increases to insurance contributions from the city to the employees to cover health insurance. And the other 300,000 roughly increase in the police department is for equipment like vehicles, tasers, computers, and a new AC unit for their side of the building. The vehicles, it's a larger amount. We normally don't spend this amount. It's just last year because we knew we were going to have depressed revenues. We didn't buy cars next year, so we're kind of catching up, or rather this year, so we're catching up next year. The second largest departmental increase occurred in Pinecrest Gardens department with a total increase of just shy of 200,000, primarily due to costs associated with the return to regular programming and travel. So let me just explain that the way we do programs, not just in Pinecrest Gardens, but also at the Parks and Recreation facilities, is we contract with third-party providers. They come in and do programs. So when we look at expenditures, you're going to see if there's an increase in programming expenditures, you'll anticipate there'll be increases in revenues from those programs as well that balance it out. So we always make a profit. If we don't, in other words, if we're not going to make a profit on it, we cancel the program and we don't have the expenditure. So when you see an increase in expenditures when it's related to programs, that's typically just a third-party pass-through because we sell the cost of the class pays for itself. Okay. All right, and we make revenue on that. As well as a capital outlay of 30,000 for irrigation and gutter systems, as well as fans, zoo animals, and a collection management system. What they mean by a collection management is because it's a botanical garden, we function like a museum, and it's a live museum. So we're putting together a collection management system that basically allows us to keep track of all our horticultural collection the same way you might have like a gallery, a museum, keep track of all its paintings, right? That collection management system will keep track of that everything that goes on from a horticultural collection at Pinecrest Gardens. Are there any questions with anything I said here before I move on to the next one?
I just had a quick question just to understand. So thank you so much. So in the police department increase, as far as personnel, I get it in, increasing for the 401ks and all the different, retirement things and insurance.
Right.
Are there going to be any increases in actual police officers? Because I
No.
looked at the other slide and it doesn't look like it, right?
No, our police numbers are exactly the same. The authorized positions are exactly the same. One thing that is changing, which is actually a benefit to us from a policing standpoint, is that the school board is now going to be providing their own school resource officers. We have always provided 2 of our officers have been assigned to the schools. And now, because they're going to be providing their own school resource officers, those officers that were typically assigned to the schools are now going to be assigned for regular patrol. So it's going to feel like we have more officers on the road, but we're not increasing the number of officers. And the other officer, we used to have what's called a task force officer, which was also assigned outside of our agency to work like with other policing agencies, federal policing agencies. And we took that task force officer off also. That task force officer was a good revenue producer because they would have forfeiture funds that could come back to the city. And usually it would pay for itself and then some, but they changed the rules of how we could use that forfeiture money. So it stopped making sense to keep the task force officer. So we got rid of that. Are there any other questions on here in particular on this, anything here? Okay. All right. So going to look at what happens with our taxable value. So we're anticipating a taxable value increase of 5.32%. So what does that mean? That means when you total all the properties in the village and what they're worth from a taxing perspective, it increased from one year to another by 5.32%. The revenues from ad valorem taxes, which is basically what's called the property tax, the millage rate that we discussed. So that taxable value increase, that 5.32% of taxable value increase represented, because we're keeping the millage rate the same, it increased our revenues from ad valorem taxes by almost just shy of $500,000. Like I mentioned, we have other revenue sources. So I'm going to just go into some of those other revenue sources that the village has. We have building related permit activity that produces revenues from, the permits, the construction permits. So we're anticipating an increase from this year to next year's fiscal year of $400,000 because of construction activity. We're seeing a huge amount of new construction happening. That's going to bump the revenues for that. Now, any revenues that are generated from the building department must be used to pay the cost of that building department. It's just the way that the law requires that those numbers be used. They are not to be used for any other purpose than to run the building department. So that increase, that $400,000, though, nonetheless, is an increase. And we're anticipating about a $20,000 increase in public works related permit activity as well for next year. Utility taxes represent revenues that come from the sale of the utilities in the village, right? And that we're anticipating is going to be producing an additional $150,000 worth of new revenues. Intergovernmental revenues are typically revenues that we get through like grants that come from other agencies in the state or the federal government. And we are showing that intergovernmental revenues are going to be down primarily because we have lost, like I mentioned, the school resource officers, which we were getting revenues for that would offset those salaries from the school board, that because they've done away with that, that was a $70,000 decrease, right? And the other large decrease came from a police grant that we got this year for about $101,000 through COVID, because of COVID monies that were coming from the federal government, which we're not going to get a repeat of next year. So when you add those things and other grants that we're not getting next year that we may have gotten this year, we're looking at intergovernmental revenues going down just a little bit over $200,000 total. Charges for services are up a total of $38,000, and it goes back to going back to normal programming at all our facilities. So again, that's a huge bump because we're anticipating in revenues a lot more ability to program. And again, if we don't program to this amount, we won't have the expenditures because again, the programs are all passed through and they, through third party entities. So it's a big chunk of money that we're seeing. And it's just anticipating us going back to normal operating for that. So as in a total sense, the revenue increased from last year to this year to the tune of $1.9 million. I can tell you from the increases I told you that we're going to see because the state numbers have been adjusted, the increase is actually going to be more than $2 million. And I can't remember the exact amount, but the numbers are better than this when it comes to the revenues that we're anticipating. Okay, are there any questions here?
Yes, please.
Go ahead.
Thanks, it's Charlie Bibb. So in this frame of revenues and third-party pass-throughs
Programs. Uh-huh.
and programs, I thought I read in a previous document, not in your budget document, that the goal for Pinecrest is to recover about 80% of operational expenses of parks and recreation on program fees. Did I read that correctly?
Yeah, so this year, our village council, when we did our strategic planning for the village, they set a goal that we're aspiring to, that will, in the next, I think it was 3 years, or I can't remember, I think in 3 or 5 years, we would try to attain that 80% mark. We were just shy of that right before COVID hit. So we know it's attainable. We were literally, I want to say, like 3% off from that 80%.
And
Where
in
that,
sorry,
that's okay.
in that 80%, the operation, that's for the parks personnel, mainly, because you're not amortizing any of the land into that, or I wouldn't think.
Right. Yeah, that is strictly the operating, like to cover the day-to-day operating expenditures. It doesn't include all the things that we've paid for from it, from a capital outlay or acquisition perspective. Right.
Thank you.
So yeah, just again, tidbits of information that I picked up over all the years I've worked. Typically, parks and recreation departments don't pay for themselves. Like the best, what do they call it? Best practices, the standard that you would see is if anything over 40% paid for by itself is already like incredible. I can tell you before COVID, we were upwards of 70%. So our model, and I think it's because we don't function like a traditional parks and recreation department. Like if you go to Hialeah, they're known for their parks and recreation.
Oh, yeah. I grew up there.
They do everything in-house. Like they train their employees to be the ones that run the programs, and everything is done in-house. So the expenditures are a lot worse. It seems a lot worse. We contract all of that out to third-party providers. And so the way we do it is a little different, but I think it keeps the costs down because we don't have a lot of full-time positions in these park facilities. It's mainly all contracted out. Okay, any other questions on any of this? Okay, let me move on to the next. Okay, so I always talk to council about things that can happen during the course of the year. When I say that, of the fiscal year, unknowns that could happen, because the way that the legislature works at the state level, they are passing laws that might impact us from a financial perspective, sometime like between January and April, all these things are happening. And then the governor signs usually their budget and any new laws and things. So by July, we know if anything they did at the legislative session is going to impact us financially. And there are things that traditionally from the last, several years, we know that they always try to change at the state level, right? Those changes, if it ever happens that it passes, can have an impact and a depressive effect on our revenue sources. So I always like to remind the elected officials and also our residents that during the course of the year, everything we anticipate is only as good as anything that stays as it is. There's a lot of things that are varying, and could happen during the course of the year. So right now, everything that we are anticipating and the assumptions are built on that the economic downturn that occurred because of the pandemic is not really going to be impacting us beyond, this year and maybe a little bit next year. All the economic forecasts said it would only last about 2 years, and we're on track financially and also nationally with that as we recover and come out of it. Efforts from the legislature that they've looked at, there's something called the communication services tax, that tax revenue. They've looked at changing how they collect it. And if they do any changes to that, it can impact our revenues. That particular revenue source generates about $750,000 for the village. So any attack on that and change on that can impact us to the negative by that amount. Same thing with the red light camera programs. they're not huge fans of the red light camera programs up in Tallahassee, and the red light camera programs generate about $1 million for the village. That $1 million a year, the way we set up the red light camera program is to it goes to capital projects mostly. So if we lose that, then we lose about $1 million worth of capital projects every year that we are able to do now that we couldn't do otherwise. They typically at the legislature do sales tax breaks, different things that they do year by year. Anytime they do a sales tax break, that's one of our revenue sources is sales tax. So anything they do to give breaks will also impact our revenue sources. And then they've been talking about eliminating the business tax license as a revenue source for municipalities, and also lobbyist registration fees. So again, these things, if they were to happen, would impact our revenues. They haven't happened yet. It's just things that I like to put on people's radar so that they know there's talk that goes towards that. Okay, so this is just a snapshot of each department. It's not the total, the detailed budget. If you want more detail, I'll show you where to look for it in each individual, in the bigger budget document. This is just a snapshot of everything. But the way that you're looking right here is it's going to show you this year's budget as it currently stands is at $23 million. And what we're anticipating, 176, and what we're anticipating next year is 24,687. Okay, and the transfers out I'll explain in more detail later, but these transfers out go to other funds. So last year the transfers out were 3.2. This year is 3.4. Next year is 2.5 roughly. So total, you'll see here, the total is from this year's budget to next year's budget. What this here is showing is where our numbers are currently looking at. What we're estimating is actually going to happen from an expenditure standpoint. So we budgeted 25.6 million. And what we're actually looking to spend is 25.1 million. So we're coming in lower than what we budgeted this year, the current year. Okay. Okay, and emergency services. This has to do with expenditures that have to do with any emergencies. In this case, we spent for COVID related emergencies, 416,000. So these are the total expenditures right here with everything together, including transfers out. Okay, so we're looking at roughly a $2 million increase between this current year's budget and next year's budget. And I'll go over more detail because we can actually get into the nitty-gritty of why everything's happening the way it is. But we kind of went over a little bit just in passing ahead of time on the previously, but I'll go over more detail if we need to. Okay, so this gives you the different categories in the budget. So the budget numbers, when you look at each department, you'll see that the budget in the big book, in the budget book, you'll see that the different categories by department. You'll see personal, again, it's personnel, but they call it personal services, is where all the salaries and benefits falls in that category. Then operating expenditures is the day-to-day widgets, things, the supplies and anything like that falls in this category. Capital outlay is anything that goes towards capital costs, like equipment costs and whatnot. And then grants and aid is a small amount that goes, it's a different category from a budgetary perspective, and that's what goes towards grants for other agencies. And then transfers typically is either to other funds or to the debt service fund. So I'll go over that. That's just the same amount of money, the total budget, that shows you that just shy of 64% of that total budget is going towards personnel costs. And just shy of 25% is going towards operating expenditures. Okay, any questions on this? Okay. All right. The proposed budget, again, is maintaining, or at least what we recommended with the numbers we had last time was 2.35% mill rate. So keeping that. It anticipates a 5% salary increase for all employees. This is set by collective bargaining with the police department. They have a 3-year contract which set the salary increase. And for those people that are not in a collective bargaining agreement, we went ahead and extended the same salary increase for all employees. The budget as it's presented to council does not include any increases for myself or the city clerk, because we're charter officials and I don't presume to give recommendations on what my or the clerk's salary increases may or may not be. They can opt to not give us anything. And that's the council's decision to make. They usually make that on the day as they discuss it and then assign whatever they want to provide us for salary increases. And there's been years that we have gotten none. The Florida retirement system is the pension that is provided only for the police department. Excuse me. The rest of the employees in the village use a 401 plan. But in the case of the police department, they fall under the Florida retirement system. That contribution that is provided is set by the state, by the Florida legislature. So we don't have any say on what that's going to be. Next year's retirement contribution for all police is at 25.89%. 3 years ago, the council reviewed our health insurance benefits, and they determined that what we provide a set amount of money per employee that goes towards health insurance. They determined 3 years ago that that amount needed to be increased, but we were not able to do that last year because of COVID. So the increase, we're bumping it basically a year after what council had wanted to do, to the $1,200 per month per employee to pay towards, that's the village's contribution towards the health insurance. Anything that goes above that from a premium standpoint, the village employee has to pay. So roughly what this pays for is 100% of the insurance benefits for each employee, and a little bit towards family. It doesn't cover the whole amount. The employee has to pay out of pocket for the difference. This is not a true statement here. This is a mistake, and I apologize that this was still in there. It should have come out. This plumbing inspector and full-time building inspector were already added this year, so we're not adding it next year. It's already in this budget, and that's a mistake. I didn't catch that. I'm sorry. Okay. Continues grant program for local schools for a total of $50,000. So we, since incorporation, or since I can remember, we have been giving $10,000 a year to every public school in the village, including Howard Palmetto. And so they are continuing to do that. It provides $3,500 for a publication of a school brochure that basically provides a brochure of all the public school that has to offer, and we pay for that. It's basically to try to, sell public schools to our residents. We provide a set aside for special community events, like sometimes, I don't know, there'll be a relay race or something that, one of the area schools might ask for, or one of the community organizations in the area might ask for some support. Financial support for something, and the council always sets money aside for that. We also provide $4,100 for transportation of the children from schools to field trips, like at Pinecrest Gardens, because the schools won't cover that cost. So they've asked if we would do it, and we've covered it traditionally. We also support this, if you see here, Uber transport of children from senior high school to middle and elementary school for the Sprout Music Program. There's a music program in the public schools, and the high school kids teach the kids in the elementary schools to play different instruments, and they transport those kids with Uber from the high school to the elementary schools to teach the kids, and then back to the high school. Oh my God, excuse me. And then a $10,000 for an economic grant. We usually provide that for, it's an entity that's called the South Dade, the name escapes me. It's kind of like a chamber of commerce that's for South Dade, and they do work from an economic development standpoint to help all the cities south of Pinecrest, all the way down to Florida City. Okay. These are the pension contributions. This chart just shows you the pension contributions that are done throughout all the village. So all the pension contributions have gone back to what they were pre-COVID, with the exception of the general employee population. The general employee population was lowered from 13% to 10% back in 2011, 10 years ago, when the recession hit, and they were trying to find the big recession, when they were trying to find savings. And we have not been able to reinstate the general employee pension back to the 13%. I'm hoping that next year we'll be able to do that. But everybody else was reinstated back to what pre-recession, because believe it or not, some of this goes back to recession before COVID. Some of those austerity measures. Okay, this is where, the projects that are the capital projects. So remember I mentioned there's different funds. So we just went over the general fund. Now we're doing capital fund. Okay, so the capital fund has lists all the larger scale capital improvement projects that are proposed for next year. The biggest chunk of money with that is the potable water project. So the village received, through the American Rescue Plan, a specific allocation because of our population numbers out of the federal government that could only be used for certain purposes, potable water being one of them, sewer could be the other. There was like a handful of things, like 5 different things that you could use it for. The village traditionally, since we incorporated, has been trying to finish the water infrastructure at the village. And because that was one of the allowable sources of funding, they decided to go ahead and use, out of the $8,049,000 allocation from the federal government, they've committed $7.5 million towards the water project. We have that water project is going to be matched with another $500,000 that's coming from the county commission, and then the balance that needed to complete that project, which is about $3.9 million, is going to be passed on to the property owners that are going to receive water through a special assessment. If we're lucky and get additional funding from the feds or from the state, then that obviously can improve the numbers, from an assessment perspective. But each property, there's about 750 properties that are going to be affected, are going to be assessed about $348 a year to finish that project, the water project. The additional $1 million this is like a set aside. Council has not decided what it's going to do with that $1,049,000 yet. So this is just listed here, but we don't know what the council might use this for yet. Like I said, there's certain allowable things. Sanitary sewers might be something that they might look at. I personally have pitched. They're considering bringing sanitary sewer to our facilities, our other parks. Not all of them have sanitary sewers, but they could also use it for stormwater drainage. We have over $40 million worth of stormwater drainage needs as per the stormwater master plan. So they can decide. They haven't decided what they're going to use this for yet. So aside from those big ticket items that you're seeing that are, in the multiple $1 million worth, the rest are kind of much smaller in scale. So I'll go over these in more detail. There's a virtual environment increase, improvements for our IT systems. This is a server, 10,000. Oh, by the way, anything in here is upwards of $5,000 is what goes into this number. So a server, if you know anything about computers, to be able to store our pictures, believe it or not, they take up a lot of space, and that in itself, one server is about $10,000. IT, when they say Windows server, that's again another computer for our Outlook, for our Windows, not Outlook, for our Windows capabilities in the village. Same thing. This IT phone system, this $55,000 is a new phone system for the village. The system we have currently, which we bought when we built that the municipal center, is already dated and not serviced anymore by the manufacturer of the phone system. So we have to replace the phone systems for a whopping $55,000. Some improvements to the parking lot lights at Flagler Grove Park for bringing them to LED capacity, $14,500. Again, some of these are like wish list items. The council may come in and then not do them. So these are just things that are built into the budget, but they don't necessarily have to be approved. That's something the council can decide, and we'll talk about. Usually this is mostly where they get into the nitty gritty, because these are more the wants. Not necessarily, some are needs, but most of these are more like wants as opposed to the needs. Like a concrete paving in the back of the Evelyn Greer Park. There's a garage facility there in the back we store, and right now it's not paved. We're asking for it to be paved. Reupholstering chairs at Evelyn Greer Park. Again, some of them are in bad shape, so that's the cost of that. Putting an asphalt path at Wayside Park. Right now it's basically dirt, not path, parking lot. Pinecrest Gardens upgrading their irrigation control system. There's a master plan that is done. It's a botanical master plan at Pinecrest Gardens. Usually that master plan is a 5-year plan. The council's already approved the master plan, the botanical master plan. So next year's allocation for the botanical master plan is $130,000. Animals for the zoo at the Pinecrest Gardens. Banyan Bowl fans. I don't know if you've been in the Banyan Bowl, but they have these ginormous, they're called big ass fans. And one of them broke down, so we have to replace one. And then the one that we're taking down, we're gonna keep, refurbish it, and have it set aside. But each one of those fans is a $12,000 fan. Video equipment. This is for the new Inspiration Center that's being built as part of the Upper Garden project at Pinecrest Gardens. This is the collection management system we talked about for Pinecrest Gardens Community Center. Potable. This is a portable LED light tower for the community center, because we sometimes park cars out there in the field in the evenings and we don't have lights up there that are permanent. So this is a portable light tower. Community Center Lightzilla. This is something for the game. It's like a fun game zone for teenagers that the Parks and Recreation Director is recommending. This, based on our just preliminary discussions with council, I think this one's going to go away because they weren't huge fans of it. So again, like I said, these are asks. They're mostly not needs. They're more wants. Some more important than others. So, we give it a shot. We ask council, and then they decide and deliberate whether they want to include it or not. This is a shade structure over the patio at the community center for $13,000. These are upgrades to the security systems at the community center, where we can have different cameras in different rooms in the community center. Fitness center equipment, some of it just over time, you have to replace certain equipment. They're only good, and then they're only maintained by the manufacturer. They have warranties, and once the warranty's gone, they won't keep maintaining those. Same thing, this is equipment and rack stuff for the fitness center. They just, over time from use, they have to be replaced. The resurfacing of the tennis courts, again, that's something that happens just about every 7 years or so. We resurface all the tennis courts at the Coral Pine Park. This is painting the fences around the tennis courts, we typically go in and just repaint those because the paint starts to crackle and come off. Right now there's a fitness area, outdoor fitness area in Sunnyland, and we're recommending putting something called pour and play on the surface, on the ground surface around that equipment. A new AC unit for the Sunnyland Park building, and then new lighting for the walkway at Sunnyland. Right now there is no walkway lighting at Sunnyland Park, so this is something that's new. And I can tell you this financing fee was going to be part of the a bond issuance, but in the new revised budget, this goes away. This won't exist anymore. So this 40,000 is going to be gone from the next one. So in the next iteration, when you see the new budget come out, this financing fee will be gone. And this revenue here is going to be increased a little bit because we got some additional revenue from the feds. So this number, which we still don't know what the council is going to spend it on, is going to be a little higher. Okay.
Question.
Uh-huh.
I know in one of the last meetings, there was a presentation on a master plan management software. And I guess it also included like website redevelopment.
Dashboard, yeah. The dashboard for ClearPoint is included in the budget. That amount is included, but it was like such a lukewarm reception from council. We've already started looking at a different solution. In fact, today I was going to get a sneak peek from the other possible solution, which is we have a company that does, if you know anything about GIS mapping for the village, GIS mapping capabilities, they're called Kimley Horn. They're engineers, but they do a lot with GIS mapping. And we reached out to them and they said that they could actually create dashboards through their GIS systems. So we already have a lot of things built in through the GIS mapping, and then trying to find a way to communicate that in a way for residents to be able to get on and see all that. And they're looking to do it. So they're going to have a presentation for council, and then council can decide if they like that better. That solution, that money that we've set aside for ClearPoint won't be used for ClearPoint. It'll be used just for the GIS setting up the dashboards that we want to do. But that'll be a one-time cost. It won't be an annual cost, because once it's set up, then it's part of our GIS mapping capabilities, and it'll be, less expensive, I think. And based on what I saw council do, I'm sure you picked up on it. Like, I thought that what we were presenting was more than what they anticipated we thought we needed. So I kind of,
nice.
I thought so too, but it was like, because for those of you like Charlie and Jack that may or may not follow like the council's strategic planning workshops and stuff, we had never done a community dashboard, and other cities do it, and the council had put it as a new goal. So I was trying to do kind of what other cities do, but the system that we found was really robust, but it also came with a price tag, like it was expensive. So the council, I think, got sticker shock, and I just read them that they might want a different solution. So I'm going to try to give them another way to still achieve what they want. And maybe not, it's not going to be as, fancy from a bells and whistles from an internal operating perspective, but that's fine because we're small enough. We already, we kind of know how we operate already. It's not the end of the world for us. It would have just been a new toy for us.
It would revamp the whole website, right? Even though it's called the dashboard for the community. It
won't revamp it. It'll just provide like landing pages where residents would have more of a easy one-stop shop view for themselves of because what we realize is people don't necessarily care about, everybody else's stuff. They want to know what affects them. Like they want to be able to go in and say, okay, what are going to be my taxes? What is it that, when is my garbage getting picked up? Like things that affect them, who are my commissioners? Who are my, state reps? Like those kinds of things. So, and there's not really a place where you can go. All of that is in the website, but it's not a one-stop place where you can put your address and get all that information immediately. So that's the dashboard that we're trying to create for people. I think it'll be helpful. Okay, any questions here?
Just one more, way down in the weeds on the Sunnyland fitness area surfacing.
Yeah.
Do you know, to me, it sounds like the courts, but I think you were talking more on the playground side. Can you tell me?
Right, there's on the playground side of the building, you know, where the kids playground, the
Yep.
playgrounds there have something called pour and play. Right
Oh.
next to the playground, they put in some exercise equipment for adults. It's outdoor exercise equipment. The surface on that exercise equipment, I think now is something that's like mulch. It's called fiber. And
Yeah.
they're suggesting that we take that out and replace it with the same pour and play surface, which is kind of like a rubbery surface.
Yeah, I got you.
From a maintenance perspective, it's easier to maintain. It's just there. The mulch kind of thing, you have to replace it, and you know, when it rains, it's not ideal. So,
Okay. Thanks.
all right, no problem. Jack, did you have any questions so far, or are we good?
Well, just a quick one on the Pinecrest Gardens Banyan Bowl fans. I'm a volunteer at Pinecrest Gardens in the Banyan Bowl.
Mhm.
And I think you said that they're going to take the fan down, replace it, and then refurbish the old one.
Correct.
And then what are they going to do? Keep that as a spare?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, why don't we just save the $12,000, take the fan down, refurbish it, and put it back up?
Because those fans only last so long. We're only gonna keep one. They do have a limited useful life. I don't think those fans are meant to be because of the elements. It's out there, you know, they do get corroded because it's believe it or not, the sea air does get to it at that level. So they usually only last about 6 years to begin with. So we're gonna go ahead and replace that fan and then refurbish it and have one there. So when we lose another one, we don't necessarily have to spend, because it's just shy of that 6 years. I think it was only 4 years old, but you know, it's not worth it, you know, to just refurbish it, put up another one, the same one, and 2 years later have to buy it anyway. So the decision, or at least the recommendation, is to just go ahead and replace the one there and keep the old one for next time another one breaks.
Okay,
Which
gotcha. Thank you.
likely happen within the next couple of years, I'm sure. Okay, let me go to the next page. Okay, so these are the other funds that we were talking about. You have the Stormwater, the Transportation Fund, the CITT Fund. I'll go over each of these. The Stormwater Fund, again, that's like the bank's account that can only be used for anything having to do with drainage projects in the village. Typically, the funding received in that fund. So you see how in the general fund, you have ad valorem taxes, sales taxes, and other, excuse me, I'm getting a call, and other revenues. In the stormwater utility fund, the main revenue sources are either grants that we might get from the state for drainage projects, or the stormwater utility fee that each property gets every year. Okay, and then you'll see that when we budget just miscellaneous storm drainage projects, and we just put in all the money into that, and we call it miscellaneous because we function off of a master plan. We did a stormwater master plan that identified over $40 million worth of stormwater drainage needs in the village, 12 million of which were our priority projects. And those $12 million worth of projects were already, I guess, 3 years into doing those projects. And based on our revenue sources that we typically get, it'll take us about 12 years, 10 to 12 years to finish the $12 million of priority projects. The good thing is right now, because of all the infrastructure money, you know how if you've been watching the federal government, they have this new infrastructure bill that they're talking about. There's going to be a lot of monies that are going to be coming from the federal government for infrastructure projects, and I suspect we'll be able to get more money from the feds to augment the money we already have towards these drainage projects, because you can use federal money from the infrastructure bill for drainage. So we'll just keep working towards that, you know, $40 million worth of drainage project needs that we have identified in the village. And hopefully get them built sooner than later. Okay. The transportation fund, again, it's a fund, a bank account that can only be used for things that are eligible for transportation. The funding that comes to that funding source, these are just identifying capital projects. The other thing that hits the transportation fund monies is a crew that is paid for through the transportation fund of public works crew. There's a 3-man crew that just is dedicated strictly to do tree trimming of our street trees along our arterial roads. That is also paid out of that fund. But here what you're seeing are the capital outlay things. So you'll see miscellaneous sidewalks. We just set aside $50,000 for that. Streetscape implementation, we just set aside, they're like placeholders. There's no specific projects that are identified. We just have the monies held there. And then as issues come up with sidewalk repairs or anything like that, we hit those accounts. Okay, the CITT fund, again, it's the CITT fund is paid for through the citizens. Oh my God, what is it? CITT stands for the citizens. I can't remember what the acronyms are. I'll let you know before we, anyway, the funding source, again, can only be used for transportation or transit. Citizen transit, I forget what it is. In here, we have, what is it?
The Citizens Independent Trust.
Oh, thank you. Citizens Independent Trust, yes, Citizen Independent Transportation Trust. Thank you, Angela. I was looking for your name and I didn't see you and I'm like, oh my gosh, she left me. And that's Angela, the assistant manager. She does the budget document, so she knows a lot of that. Okay, so the Citizen Independent Transportation Trust is funding source where that provides funding towards this fund, can only be used for either transit or transportation initiatives. So we do have a transportation master plan that the council did 2 years ago that's identified a lot of different projects throughout the village for that are transportation oriented. And we also pay for like people mover, you know, the circulator that moves the kids, and the freebie, all that is paid for out of that same fund. But here, what's showing here are the capital outlay things. So you have master plan projects to the tune of 400,000, 100,000 set aside for paving, like if you get potholes or anything like that, where we redo some streets. And then same thing, it's a placeholder for sidewalks here. So when you look at the total capital projects, things that are only just capital related, that next year, it's about $12 million worth of capital projects. A big chunk of that being the water project, right? That we talked about earlier. Okay.
One question, Yossi, real quick. As far as the federal infrastructure bill, do you guys have an idea of what you would get if it passes?
No, because they still have not given those details. I've heard that they are looking at, we did get some monies for stormwater drainage out of another bill recently, that it was like 600,000 that we did get. But the big one, the one that they're calling the infrastructure bill, it hasn't passed the Senate yet. And that is the one that we're still waiting on to get an idea. But based on just the parameters of what I've seen, it's going to be really, the perfect use is going to be stormwater drainage, mostly because we already know and have identified so much of it in that master plan we talked about. So likely that's where council's going to want to spend that and put its efforts into, is doing the stormwater drainage throughout the village, because the water is going to be done. And then the next big chunk is the sanitary sewer, but because we're not the utility, we know that the county is looking to do sanitary sewers countywide, and that's going to be more of a county focus. We're not going to get into that, you know. We're typically going to just focus on the things we control, which is the stormwater utility, which we do have control over. Okay, The proposed millage rate that we talked about, the 2.35, this is just a snapshot of what a person, the average person that has certain taxable values. Like there's houses in the village, the lowest taxable value in the village, probably in a condo, is about 131,000. They pay $309 to us. For the average home, an average home in Pinecrest that has a taxable value of 914,000, they're paying 2,148 to us. And the highest taxable value home is a $0.9 million taxable value. They're paying $14,000 to the village. Okay. Any questions on that? Again, if you remember, it's 2.35 for every $1,000 of taxable value. Okay. This just shows you what, okay, when from a millage perspective, what ad valorem taxes are generated with the millage we proposed. So with the mill rate we proposed, we're generating $12.6 million worth of revenues from property taxes. If we were to go to the rollback rate, right? Remember how I said the taxable value has increased by 5-point-something%? If we went back to the rollback rate, which means we would keep the taxable value the same and not, and lower the tax rate to keep it the same, it would be lowered to a 2.25. That would bring the 12.1 million in taxable value. To increase the mill rate beyond the 2.35, you need a majority vote, and that threshold would be a 2.4. And this is just to give council, when they talk about what they may be able or want to do in the village, in the budget perspective, it's just a snapshot of what they can do. For every 10 cents of mill increase, it generates a little over $500,000. So when they talk, like in terms of millage rates, like let's say that right now it's 2.35. Let's say that they say, well, if we bring it down to 2.25, that would be a decrease in the budget or in that revenue of 500,037. You get what I'm saying? Okay. This is just for them, like for when we talk to them that they want to, like they start talking numbers, this kind of gives them that snapshot. Okay. This is basically our general fund balance. This is like after we've paid all our bills at the end of the year, what money is left in our house, right? So it shows you over the course of the years since our incorporation. At some point, I'm not going to be able to keep all these numbers in because this chart just keeps getting bigger and bigger, but it shows you traditionally that when you look at this, we've always tried to keep a general fund balance traditionally around somewhere between $7 and $8 million. It hovers, right? There's been times in our history where we've gone below that amount. When you see here where we've, either used it for an acquisition, capital acquisition, where instead of spreading out the debt over, 20 years, they've just paid cash for something, and that would account for some of these dips. Okay. But we do have a financial policy in our that we use, and that financial policy basically has established that the only thing we should be able to use any general fund balance for is to either pay down debt or do capital projects, that we should not be using this for recurring expenditures. So we don't want to balance our recurring expenditure budget with revenue, with, savings. That's not how our financial policies work. So you'll see here for next year, the light green shows what our cash in hand in the bank, what's sitting as a bank balance. And then this blue chunk here is about $1.5 million of worth of funds that are sitting and still being contested with FEMA for monies that were spent in Irma. So when we have a hurricane, we submit reimbursement for our expenditures to FEMA. And we had for Irma, I want to say like 3.2 or $3.5 million worth of expenditures. We've already gotten a good chunk of those already, what they call obligated and reimbursed to the village. And there's 1.5 of those expenditures that are in appeal because FEMA denied our request to reimburse, and we are now appealing that decision to FEMA. The appeal process with FEMA is onerous and takes years, but part of that process involves the state reviewing our request for reimbursement and providing a recommendation to the feds, and the state has recommended approval of those reimbursement requests. Okay, so we're just caught up in the red tape of FEMA and fighting, going through they do requests for information, and then you got to respond, and it takes 90 days and this and that. And we've gone, in fact, in front of an arbitration board because they went beyond their timeline according to their own rules to respond to us, and we won. So we've been going back and forth with FEMA, but that's still in play. Worst case scenario, if we don't win the appeal in the end, our coffers are showing right where this blue line starts. So it's right here. Right now, we're just shy of the 7 million mark. Okay, we're just over. If you look at here, it's about a little shy than $7 million. Okay. Okay. All right. This chart basically shows you our revenues and expenditure trends historically. So the revenue trends historically have been, you could see the trend line here, and then here's like, we had a dip in 2018 and 19, the revenues dipped and they're starting to pick up again. And then from an expenditure standpoint, our expenditures, these big bumps here is typically, if you saw the last one, I'll just go back real quick. It'll collaborate with these here. There were purchases, right? Big purchases, like when we purchased Pinecrest Gardens, and some of the bigger purchases give these big hiccups on the expenditure side. Okay, and then it kind of normalizes back again. And so we're right on trend with those budgets. This chart shows you what we budget traditionally and the difference between what we budgeted and what we actually spent for the year. So you'll notice before the recession, right? Before there were austerity measures where we really cut back, we would always have like a surplus at the end of the year. We had a little more wiggle room here these years. And after the recession, which was around this time here, our numbers are coming in a lot tighter. There's not a lot of wiggle room from what we budget to what we end up actually spending in a year. This year, the current year we're in, like I said, when we went over, remember how I said the actuals looked better? Our numbers actually look better because our revenues also came in better than what we anticipated from the budget perspective. So we had a little bit of good news on that end, but we had also tightened up on the expenditure side. We put aside and didn't buy vehicles and things like that because we didn't know what was going to happen with COVID. So when you see zero difference, it means we're running tight. There's not a lot of wiggle room between expenditures and actuals. Okay. And this shows you historically monies that were transferred from the general fund for capital projects. So we're low this year. We're not transferring a lot of the general fund money. So there's going to be a lot of capital project funds are coming, like I showed you, through big federal grants that are paying for the majority of those capital projects, the bigger projects. Okay. This is a snapshot of our general fund balance over the years. And then we always have a minimum set aside. So best practices for cities throughout show you and typically suggest that you have a 10% set aside for your budget, and then an additional set aside that is typically for natural disasters. So when we first incorporated, we only set aside about $1 million. That's the red line you see here. This is the set aside minimum. We bumped it up to $3 million here. So we were doing $1 million. Then we bumped it to $2 million here, the set aside for hurricane rain, rainy day fund. And then we bumped it to $3 million. So that's what this red line is showing. So we're on target. We have in our coffers what we need to meet the target minimum set aside for best practice. What does this all mean? This means this is the reason that we have a AAA bond rating, is because we are financial. When they look at these financial considerations, we look really good. We're conservative, and we have what we need and always have provided that. Okay, and this is just a short, a closer shot of the last 10 years. The other one shows the history of the village. This one's just the last 10 years, just for ease of understanding of where we're at. So the yellow here is still the unknown. But right now, as it stands, we have in our coffers $6,044,000, and the minimum we needed was $6,003,000. So we're right on target. If we had the FEMA money, we would obviously be $1.5 million worth higher than that. So that's the unknown. Okay. Are there any questions with any of these so far? No. Okay. And then the final chart I wanted to go over here is just to give you a snapshot of how your tax dollars. Remember how we looked at that millage rate chart that had all the taxing jurisdictions? This shows you how we compare to those taxing jurisdictions. So when you look at your taxes that you pay, the biggest chunk of money in your taxes actually goes to school board in your pot, right in the pie. The second largest goes to Miami-Dade County and their library district. The third largest goes to the fire rescue district at the county, and then comes Pinecrest. So roughly just below what you paid for the fire rescue capabilities in the village, which amounts to one station within our municipal limits, you get everything else that you get with the village: police department, parks and recreation, Pinecrest Gardens, and everything else. So that kind of gives you a perspective of how we function in comparison to those. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing this now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to go and look at the budget document online, which is here. Okay, so if you go on our website and you type in budget in the search engine, you will find the budget for the village, the one that we were just looking at. Okay, it's a 200+ page document. Okay, so the things that you should like to do your kind of homework before this meeting is you go into the budget document, and you're gonna go to, I mean, it's a good read if you really like, if you're like a nerd like me that loves numbers, you'll love it. It's a good read, and it has a lot of good information about the village in a general sense. But the one that you definitely want to kind of get a snapshot and read is what they call the manager's budget message. And it's basically like an executive summary of everything. And that, I went too fast. Stop. Sorry, I hit something too many times. Let me see. We got that. In the beginning of the budget, you'll see like a section here, like I'll show you this, where it talks about the strategic plan. See how up here it says the strategic plan? This is just a copy of the strategic plan, and it shows you what the council's goals are for the next 5 years. So everything that's in the budget is going to somehow tie into the council's strategic plan. We try to match our numbers to fulfill their goals, what they have identified as their goals. Let me see where it is here. Angela, oh, never mind, don't worry, I'll figure it out. Okay, here, budget message. So when you get to the budget document on page 58 electronically is where you'll find my budget message. And in here, it gives you the snapshot of everything. It gives you the financial, look back 5 years, what's happened the last 5 years before this budget. So you, from a financial standpoint, you'll kind of get an idea of what happened the last 5 years that was significant from a budgetary standpoint. And it'll talk to you, it'll give you from a national perspective and state perspective, the economy, what it looks like, what we're anticipating is going to happen. So the assumptions that go into effect, talks about the future fiscal solvency. So it really gets in more in detail. Remember that slide that went into the things the legislative session, the legislature might do? This gets really into the nitty gritty of what they tried to do the last legislative session. It gives you all those details in here. So it's about 10 pages long, I think, the total budget message, but that will give you a good snapshot of everything that I think you need to really understand. Then when you look at the budget, aside from the budget message, if you want to look at the details, okay, let me just take you to each department. So here, we're still in the budget message. Hold on. Let me see. Let's see. I'm going to just show you because every department is done the same way. Let me see what this is. Here are the financial policies. So like I said, there's a lot of information in here, and it can get a little over the top. Hold on, but I wanted to show you what to look for. Okay, real quick on the, there's a section that's called revenues. On the revenue sections, there's an explanation for every single revenue that we collect, why it's collected, how it's collected, and what it can be used for. So if you want to get into those details, it's all in the revenue projection rationale, and it shows you the trends of that revenue over the years. And if it's a downward trend, it'll explain why it's trending downward. So if you'll see the different revenue sources, what they do, and how they've been doing it and why they're doing it. So it's all like really good information if you have questions on each revenue source. And then when you get into the departments, let me see. This is the same snapshot that was in that presentation. This is like just a quick of all the departments, but then you get into the nitty gritty, which is each department. Okay, so all the budget is set up the same way by department. So let's say the village council. Let me just pick one that has a little bit more of everything. I'll go to the police so you could see, but they all read the same way. So you can, let me look for police. You can go department by department, and then I'll go over it with you so you can see. Where's police? Here it is. Okay. So every department will have a function. It'll explain the function of that one department, the objectives that are tied to the strategic planning objectives that impact that department, the performance measures that are being monitored for that department, the prior year, which is this current fiscal year's accomplishments, things that have happened. It'll tell you how that department's, the people, the authorized positions for that department, full-time, part-time, in this case, civilian, non-civilian personnel. And then it gets into the highlights of the budget, things that are changing from one year to another in the budget. So those are all written and provided there in detail. Those are the highlights. And then you get to see the actual numbers. And then, if you just like to look at numbers, which, some people do, you'll notice in every department, any revenues that are being generated by a department are also in there, so that you get a sense, okay, the police department, things that have to do with policing generate about $1 million worth of revenues, right? And then this shows you the detail on the personnel expenditures, the insurance, how it's all, broken down. And then the operating expenditures, professional services, contractual services, investigations, travel, and per diem. These are all these categories are set by the state. The state is the one that tells us what can go and hit each of these categories. And that gives you the detail. So you'll see, like in other contractual services, it went up. Now, what you won't see is, okay, why did it go up? It won't show that here, but in the budget highlight, it'll explain why it went up. It'll explain the change between one year and another. So if you're really curious, okay, why did it go up here? You can go to other contractual services, to the highlight, the budget highlight, right? That we talked about before, other contractual, and it'll tell you this line item increased 4,600 because the vendor cost for the traffic light camera increase was mainly due to the inclusion of funds for the cloud service for one additional movable speed trailer. Okay, so it'll tell you why it increased. So, and that same setup you'll see for every department. Capital outlay is equipment and machinery or anything that has to do with like the physical plant, like something that might be happening to a building, something physical. And then grants and aid is to other agencies, is what hits this category. So every single department will have that same kind of layout. And you can see, for example, here, this is the building and planning department. Building and planning department will have their revenues, what they generate in revenues, what the costs are for personnel, and then the operating expenditures are here. Like in the case of this budget year, their operating expenditures are decreasing, if you notice. From this is the budget year, and this is the current budget year, and this is the recommended column. But you can see every single department is built in the same way. Okay, so I'm not going to go through the whole thing. What we do internally, and the council won't go through all of this during their budget hearings, because what we do internally is we sit individually with each council member before the budget meeting and go over in detail for hours, each one of them, the whole budget, the expenditure, the revenues, and they get to see the background of all these numbers. So when they get into the workshops that they have, they already have an idea, as do we, because we've met with them individually ahead of time, what is going to be pulled out or not go forward, or concerns that they might have. And so if there's consensus on the back end that I realize, okay, this is, this isn't going to happen, I likely will just take it out, before it even goes to council workshop. If not, it'll stay in, and then they'll have discussion during council meeting and make a decision on whether it stays or goes. So like I said, typically the personal services, unless they have an issue, but I mean, it's collective bargaining agreement, the setting of salary increases, all that is done through collective bargaining. So if there's an existing contract, they typically won't go into that. The things that they typically will get into and more discussion will really focus and go around the capital outlay stuff, the capital project stuff. And that's just the way it normally works for us. Okay. All right, let me see if there was anything else that I can think of. But again, like I said, everything is in here in the big budget document. Feel free to look at, okay, in the capital project sections. So you'll see an explanation for each thing. It'll give you more detail on those projects, what it's doing, why it's costing what it is. It'll show you, it gives you just more detail on each thing. So each project will have one of these in their capital project fund section. And you can see, it'll show you what exists now and why we want to, like, this is the paving, at Veterans Wayside Park that we want to pave the parking lot. So it'll show you what it looks like now. So this is kind of cool to look at the capital project section of the budget also, because a lot of that will give you an idea of what, like right now they have these green chairs. They're looking to reupholster these green chairs. That's one of the things in there. So those will give you good detail. And then this is that I don't know, Godzilla Lightzilla light thing. That was like whatever amount it was. That's what it looks like, right? So take a look at this. It'll at least make you familiar with what we're talking about. This is a potable light, tower light that they were talking about. This is the ASR, which is that security, like in case of an active shooter that you could punch it and it sets off an alarm. That's what the ACR is. We got this installed at the municipal center recently, and they want to do it at the community center as well. So take a look at this, the animals for the petting zoo. For those of you who are not aware, we are redoing our whole petting zoo. So we're going to be getting additional animals there. So this gives you all of that information, I think. And then if you have any questions between now, if you listen to the workshop and before the first and second hearing of the budget, which happened in September, if you have any questions, you can always email me on anything that you're not sure about, and I can respond to you, with the answer, or, we can have a Zoom call and I can go over it with you however you prefer. But we're here to help and answer any questions. I'm just going through this. This is, the debt service fund. Okay, let me just go over it real quick because we didn't go over that. The debt service fund is found in the budget document at page 229. So the debt service fund is where we pay all our debt, the bonds or the bank loans. We typically do bank loans. We don't do a lot of bonds, but we typically do bank loans for our big capital outlay, capital acquisitions and projects. Okay, so this will tell you, like this here shows you what are the different bank loans that we have, what the annual debt service payment is. So that's like our mortgage, our annual mortgage, right? To equate it to your own, financial workings in your home. So these are our annual debt. It ends, for example, this bank loan will end in 2024. So that as of 2025, we won't have that debt service payment. So there'll be a savings of roughly 200,000 in our budget. Here in this one, expect the last payment will be in 2029. So in 2030, we'll have, roughly $479,000 of monies that won't have a debt service to pay for. So that's basically how this works. Council sometimes will say, you know what, let's go ahead and reissue, let's go ahead and pay this off early, and then they'll reissue a new debt. So this debt, I think there's a chart here that tells you what the original loan was. It gives you good information in here. It tells you all the things that were, what that bond was originally for, what it was financed at, and like some bank loans were for $6 million, others were like $8 million. So here it'll give you the detail on each of those series that we were above. And this is how we pay, what part is principal, what part is interest, okay, on each of those bank loans. So what we normally do is we retire one loan and then we'll reissue another one for the same amount to do whatever other things. We aren't, right now the council is, we just purchased the Palermo property, which is now called the Gary Matzner property. That property, any improvements to that property will likely not happen until we retire that bond, that bank loan that was a little bit, that's like, we got 2 more years on it, this one.
2024.
Yeah. So what'll likely happen with that is like, we'll spend the next year doing the concepts of what we might do with that project, right, with that property. And then another year doing the construction documents for that property. And right around the time that this is expiring, is when we would be paying this off and then reissuing the new to pay for that project. You see how they do it? So that's likely what will happen. There's a couple things in flux right now that are not part of this budget, which are potential things that could happen. There's the more important one is Bet Shirah, that property, Bet Shirah property.
On
is
120th?
it's
Near
going to
the
be
high school?
going up for sale next month. We have appraisals already on that property. Council has not discussed whether they're going to purchase that property or not, but
How big is
that
it?
will, it's like a 10, I want to say, I think it's 10. It might not be as big as a 10-acre property, but it's a sizable property. So that property in particular, we've done appraisals on. We're just updating them because some of them were a little dated. And council may discuss that, not in budget, but if it happens that they decide to buy that property, the purchase of that property would be, that discussion will happen sometime next fiscal year. And if they were to decide to go forward with the purchase of that property in particular, that property, the size of it and the fact that it already has property, buildings on it, would require an increase in revenue in millage rate. There's no way that we can absorb that. Like we absorbed the Palermo property with the existing millage rate because there's nothing on that property. So it was just the cost of acquisition. And now any operating cost, that property in particular, based on what we've talked about, I don't expect it to be more than just like a passive type of park. I don't know that what they're going to do, but I don't think it's going to be a very expensive facility. But the Bet Shirah property, which has huge buildings on it, that just maintaining and operating that facility, if they kept those buildings on the facility, on the property, would be a huge chunk of money. It would be like buying Pinecrest Gardens all over again. And so
And
that's, go ahead.
What would be the rationale for buying that, and what would be the envisioned purpose?
So one of the things that's happening right now, and I just don't know if it's going to work from a timing perspective for the council, but we're doing our Parks and Recreation master plan right now. That Parks and Recreation master plan is going to look at our existing facilities and where we land from a level of service standpoint.
Mhm.
And it's going to look at, if changes are made where they do, because there's also been discussions to do mixed use development on the US 1 corridor, which potentially, if it includes residential mixed use, not just office, but if it includes a residential component, which they haven't decided yet, but if they were to do that, that increases population. The minute you increase population, then the level of service from a park perspective, right, is going to be impacted. Right now, I don't know what the level of service is, but let's say that we have a level of service, and I don't know that this is accurate, so don't go off of this, but let's say that we have 5 acres for every 1,000 people. If you have more people, that now is going to be impacted. So the reasoning could be that they say, okay, we're going to anticipate X amount of people in the future over the next 40 years, let's say. Do we need more parklands? Do we want to add amenities that we don't have right now in the village? These are all considerations, whether it's worth it to them or to the community, because this is going to be a big chunk of money. The community would likely have to, come in and say, we think it's a good idea. We want more ball fields. We want more, whatever, turn it into a senior center. Like there could be so many things. We just don't know. So the council, again, they haven't even put it up for sale. I'm anticipating the minute, because I know that they are going to, that it's going to go public in September. They already told me that. So I'm updating the appraisals. And then at some point, the council is going to talk whether they want to go into that or not. And then, I don't think that those discussions will happen in the budget time, but shortly thereafter, because of the timing, because they listed in September, then council is going to be talking about it around the same time. But the mill rate has already been set for this year. Like to increase the mill rate now, they can technically do it, but politically, I don't think they would. So they would, if they were to buy that property, they wouldn't be doing it and increasing taxes to the following year. if they decided to do something like that.
And if they do, are we in direct competition with anyone who wants to bid on that property, or do we have any leverage because we're in Pinecrest?
No, we don't have leverage. We would be in competition. That property is zoned as public service at the PS. So like it can only be used for a park or a, school, another school kind of use. So I think realistically, we have a good, one of the things that council also may want to do is take it off the market and then decide what they want to do, if they want to do anything with it at all. Because if the thing to do is take it off the market, they might decide we're going to take it off the market and then decide what we're going to do with it. And then if we don't want to do anything with it, we can sell it, right? But they take it off the market so that it doesn't get bought by somebody else. So I don't know what's going to happen, but these are things that are likely going to happen because I don't know. The timing was weird because we just bought Palermo. Had we not bought Palermo, I think they would have liked this better. But we just bought Palermo, so I don't know how that plays into their decision making. But anyway, these are things that are going to be on radar for the next 3 months or so. And then, okay, so that gives you the rough, budget 101. So you guys have to go do your homework because it'll take days to go through that budget. So go do your homework. If you have questions and you want to ask me anything between now and the budget hearings, you can, email me. And my email, if you don't know it, I'll give it to you now. It's the letter Y, Galliano, my last name, at pinecrest-fl.gov. Or you could just do manager at pinecrest-fl.gov and -fl.gov. And I will get the email and then I can respond with any questions that you might have once you start going through the whole budget. If you find any mistakes when you're reading it, typos or anything, I please ask you to let us know because that can happen.
So Matzner and one, and I should have jotted the page down, claims it's a 4-acre park and it's like 3.5 or 3.6.
Okay.
And then it is corrected later in the document. I did kind of go through it.
If you see it again, just let us know. Because yeah,
know.
when we work on it, it's like a lot of different people working on one project and one document. So when we put it together, sometimes things are we don't catch it. We use the same document and we just build on it year after year. So sometimes there's things that are leftovers, that shouldn't be there. And so it's just human error. So if you see anything, feel free to write me, we're not embarrassed to be corrected. We rather fix it when it's published, the final budget is published correctly.
So since this is some of our first rodeo in this process, you did a phenomenal job today of walking us through, and I'm glad that I did have a chance to review it beforehand to get a little familiar. Now I'm going to go back and do it again.
Right.
But I have so can you just help me understand the rest of the process and where a resident might have some input, whether or not that input is in the currently proposed budget? Okay.
So the residents have input on the budget from the moment that it gets published. So right now, what you have in front of you, your review of it, anything that you have opinions about, you can relay those opinions either through phone, calling the council members, or writing them individually to go over any concerns you might have individually. Mm-hmm. Then in addition to that, right, as you listen to the budget workshop, you'll see that potentially they have the same concerns that you have, right? Something that you've already seen, they'll see it and they'll be like, why is this? They'll be asking questions. So a lot of things will happen during the budget workshop that they'll make changes. Mm-hmm. So I always suggest that unless it's something that's burning, that you really feel you need to get it off your chest and talk to them now, that you wait till you hear what they do during budget workshop. Because when they do budget workshop, a lot of changes are made to the budget. And then those changes is what goes to first and second public hearings, right, in September. The public hearings will allow for people to get up and speak during those meetings, and you can speak about whatever concerns you have, but you don't have to wait to that time either. You could also do it ahead of that, calling them or writing them. And, you know, if you call them personally, you can talk to them one-on-one, give them your input, they'll talk to you. It's going to be more of a conversation like what this is versus at a budget meeting. When the budget hearing happens, what typically happens is they open the public hearing, they'll ask the person to get up, they speak, they give their name, their address, and then your opinion about whatever it is you want to say to them. But it's not a conversation. They don't get to answer you. It's not a back and forth. They'll take your comments. They'll be like, thank you very much. And then you sit down and then another person will get up and speak. So they're listening to what you have to say, but they're not going to get engaged into a back and forth the same way they would if you speak to them on the phone or if you're email them. So I think if I were a resident, I would be doing it more ahead of time, because then you'll get the benefit of having that back and forth conversation with them as opposed to just telling them what you think at the meeting. They'll listen to the conversations, you know, to what each person's opinion is. Then they close the public hearing, and then they may deliberate further or not, and then they just motion to go forward. On the first hearing, like I said, by the time they get to first hearing, they've already told staff and we've already made changes of things that have come out of the budget. So it's not to say things can't happen during the first budget meeting. By the second meeting, mostly it's a rubber stamp, because by that time, anything's already been hashed out. Everything's already been talked about during their workshop. Then at first hearing, any other changes. By second hearing, typically, unless, you know, an asteroid is coming and it changes everything, it'll likely just be rubber stamped, because it'll already have gone through 2 meetings for them of going over it, plus the one that we do individually with each of them. So it's a lot of meetings to go over it with them. Okay.
Can I ask you one more question?
Sure.
I know there's a workshop coming up on land use, and I guess land use is what you call it. So I know that it's a lot of different changes all lumped into one, because you guys don't do this very often.
Correct.
So I want to participate in that too. I think it's really interesting, but I don't know the plan of each change that's being proposed. I know some of them, but not each one. And I know there's a lot. Are there any changes planned inside that workshop that include this Bet Sherrod property?
No.
Changing it from a school, from either like a public use to something else?
No. Those are zoning changes, and there are no zoning changes being discussed by council right now. Like I said, the land development regulations and things that have to do with land development, the code, the stuff that they're talking about right now has to do with not any zoning changes. It has to do with either tweaks to the code for things that staff over time finds like isn't working, it's creating confusion, or there's an issue that needs to be changed. There's not a lot in there of substance. Now, in a month or 2, council, I want to say, let's see, because I think the timing of it is like in October, we're going to start doing charrettes to do, remember I said about that mixed use and US 1 that we were going to do. There's a vision plan that was done in, I want to say 9 years ago at this point, that established that we were going to do mixed use development along US 1 corridor. The mixed use development that we were talking about back then was retail and office mixed use. There's now, after that happened, there was the county did what's called the SMART plan. I know, Laura, you know what I'm talking about, where they did the bus rapid transit and that whole corridor along, the South Dade transit corridor. They've just done the what they call a SMART plan. That SMART plan talks about different transportation hubs at like these larger stations, right? And the idea is that wherever you have these large stations, just like Dayland North and Dayland South stations, that they want to see what's called transit-oriented development, which would imply that you would add a residential component, right, to some of that mixed use along the US 1 corridor. So when they start getting into that discussion, the question is going to be, are the village residents okay with introducing? They already were okay with mixed uses for office and retail. What we need to find out is would they be okay with residential and retail, or residential and office, mixed use, or a combination of the three, and where that would happen and how that would happen and what it would look like and what are people comfortable about. And that discussion we're going to do, if you participated in like 3 years ago, we did something called the Inspire Pinecrest civic engagement campaign, where we did a bunch of in-person meetings. There were 300 and something people, residents, that would come in, and we would vet ideas and people would respond. We're going to do all that virtually and allow residents that want to participate, which I'm expecting will be hundreds, to do it through like a survey, like a live survey. We would be doing presentations, and then people would be responding live through surveys of what they like, don't like. And that way we kind of get a sense of what will fly or not fly from a change in the uses along the corridor in US 1, right?
Date for that yet?
We don't. We're going to have I'll know more after that workshop, because during that workshop, we're going to be walking them through the concept of how we're going to go forward. And then we're going to set dates for when these things will happen. But the charrettes will likely happen in October, and then a second one in November before the holidays.
But the workshop is in September, right?
The one that I'm going to talk to council about doing this, and the next steps is going to be now in September. So after that September workshop, I'll have the dates for the charrettes, and we'll give enough, ample time. We'll put stuff out in the community, like we did last time. We had these big billboards telling people, like, go here, do this. So we want to have that, like, real robust engagement to get feedback. But all that has to do with the land use is not part of the budget. That's going to be later.
But when's this workshop happening?
The workshop, I think, is, let me tell you right now.
I just want to make sure.
I don't know, or the clerk might know, and he might be listening if he can, or he may not be listening. Hold on, let me see if I can find it on.
Because September's around the corner.
Yeah, hold on. I just don't know the dates, and I'm still delirious from my marathon trip of
It's all on the village's website. If you just go to the main site, you'll see the calendar.
Oh yeah, okay, thank you, Guido. I know, I just was looking here to tell them the date. The workshop is the 25th of August. And then the council's gonna have a regular meeting on September 14th, and then a budget meeting on the 16th.
The August 25th workshop is the budget workshop. That's not the.
Oh, when is the LDR one? Do you have it there?
I don't have it. I'm not looking at the web. So it's
fine.
In September. It's listed on the list of meetings that's on the website.
Okay, hold on. I'm trying to find it here. So it's in September? Let me look. Hold on. Okay. That workshop. Oh my God, I don't see it. Oh yeah, it is. Okay. It's on the 21st at 3 p.m. September 21st. Okay.
Just to clarify, that 921 is the corridor housing workshop?
No, it's the LDRs. We're doing LDRs, the land development regulations that council is looking at. But during that meeting, I'm going to talk to them about doing the Inspire Pinecrest exercise to start getting the concept on the mixed use stuff and the US 1 stuff out to the residents to get them to participate. So we'll be setting the calendar. So I'll know after that date what dates we're going to have the charrettes and all those other meetings that come.
And is that sorry, is that a kind of a preemptive move? Because I thought the county is, or somebody within Miami-Dade County is trying to say, hey, we own the zoning,
It's not preemptive because we were going to do it anyway. So, but yes. So yes and no. The county, there's a commissioner who has come up with this idea to do stuff that would be decimating for us as far as our character, our community character and everything.
Yeah.
So not just for us, but countywide. So that one commissioner that floated this draft document has riled up the entire county and every mayor and council member around town. So I don't know that that is going to go anywhere. Let's suppose that they do, which I don't think it will, because our commissioner, Regalado, she's been bombarded with calls, all the commissioners across the county. So I don't think it's going to go anywhere, but let's say that something crazy happens and they're going to move forward. If they try to preempt zoning and take that away from the village or any city, that will be war. That will be recall efforts. That will be lawsuits. We will tie up the county for years fighting that. That is not gonna, we're not gonna sit back and let that happen. So aside from that though, we had done the US 1 vision plan. And back in January, before we even knew this gentleman was gonna come up with these ideas, the last year, there was discussion of doing something that's called a TIF along the corridor, but it was only affecting the unincorporated areas. But that signaled to us something is amiss, you know? And so the mayor, who is a transportation planner by trade, had said, you know what, we need to dust off the vision plan and look at that again and take that, make sure that we do that transportation oriented development situation, but that we control it. Because I think he had a premonition, like he knew. We've been in government long enough and he knew something was amiss. And so we started the process. We did it during strategic planning process back in January. We were already talking about, okay, we got to redo that. Let's look at the thing. Let's dust off the land development regulations. So we had already started looking at what other communities are doing that seems like something we might want to explore here, like what they do in Naples, where they have mixed use development, or what they did like at Meisner Park in Boca, and certain other developments, you know, nationally. And we had already started that process when this guy came with his, you know, I'm being facetious, brilliant ideas, right? And so the timing was good in that sense, except that, you know, the fear is that people are going to think that this is being done to help that along. It's not, it's the opposite. And so it's about drawing the line, like not going beyond what's commercial. What they're anticipating, that guy, what he was suggesting, that commissioner was actually going into residential and changing the zoning. We're not doing that. It's the opposite. If anything, the residential is going to come into commercial, not commercial into resident. Like it was different. It was the opposite. But, you know, we'll see how this plays out. I think doing the hubs around those stations makes sense, because in this heat, nobody walks more than, 3 blocks anywhere anyway. And so trying to get, 3 miles in, or whatever it is that they were trying to do for upzoning ridiculous, 90 units an acre or something stupid like that, is never going to fly here. It'll change our character. A third of our city wouldn't even look like it does today if they did it that way. So no worries, because we'll fight that to the end. That is, one of the, like we say, one of the reasons we incorporated was to control zoning in the village. So trying to lose that will be all war. It will be recall efforts for everybody and their mother. So I can assure you of that. So, all right, any other questions? If not, we'll wrap it up. And again, if you have any questions from now until the last hearing, feel free to write me. And if you see any typos, please let me know. Just tell me the page and the location and we'll get it fixed. All right.
Thank you so much.
Wait, there's a chat question here. I don't know if Jack, can we ask questions in between?
That was me at the beginning.
Oh, that was okay. Jack, did you have any questions? Because you were quiet.
Yeah, no, I just was taking it all in. I was very impressed with the presentation. You really know your stuff, as they say. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm glad to see new faces. We usually get the same people, so it's fun when I get new people. I get to teach a little bit.
Well,
All right.
thank you.
You're welcome. Have a good evening.